So on the channel, we've covered a few of the 2D platforming MMORPGs. The juggernaut and still popular MapleStory was the first I covered on the channel since it held so many good childhood memories for me. To this day, it still has a dedicated fan base that refuses to let it die. One side loves the new changes with the game and embraces its casualization, while the other can't seem to let go of the past and plays the retro private servers available. The second game covered was the criminally underrated Laetale, which luckily is still hanging on by a thread in 2020. Laetale also houses some fond memories for me, but it too fell to casualization from its developer in an effort to try and drive new players to the game. I briefly mentioned that there was others that came and went. Games like Wonder King and Windslayer, which tragically both got shut down soon after their release. However, I did mention one other game that, funnily enough, is still playable to this day. That game would be Soul Saver Online, otherwise known as its first iteration, which was called Ghost Online or Go. The name shifted from Ghost Online since the game did initially shut down its Western servers in 2009 due to poor revenue, but strangely enough was resurrected on Steam in 2012 under the new name Soul Saver Online. The game was largely untouched, with a few small changes here and there, but overall the game came back, unlike Wonder King and Windslayer, whom vanished. Soul Saver Online is essentially the underdog's underdog within the 2D platforming MMORPG genre, but it's probably the most hardcore in terms of gameplay. It has a good sense of difficulty and level scale that MapleStory and Laetale trivialized long ago, which was refreshing to see. But obviously, even with its release on Steam in 2012, the game never garnered any sort of buzz. Heck, if you are watching this video, this may be the first time you have ever even heard of Soul Saver Online. So after playing it for a week, I'm here to give my analysis like I always do. So, should you play Soul Saver Online? Logging into Soul Saver Online for the first time, you are greeted with only one server option and a few channels to choose from, similar to MapleStory and Laetale. Character creation is definitely lacking, but then again, so are Maple and Laetale's character creation, so I can't really fault Soul Saver for cutting corners here. Aesthetics aside though, there are quite a number of classes to choose from, with most having two different ways to play the class, which, once again, is like the other two games I keep mentioning.
MapleStory, MapleStory.
The classes in Soul Saver Online work a little differently than its competitors though. The starting classes, which represent the Central District, are the Fencer, Magic User, Spearman, Assassin, Fighter, and Archer. Once you reach level 60, then you get access to the Evil Forces classes, which are the Mamluk, Saladin, Dark Mage, and Janissary. Each class selection also shows an ability they use to give a slight idea of how the class will play. Once you pick a class, you can then edit your hair and eyes, choose a name, and then you are thrown into honestly a hilarious starting cutscene that gives the backstory of the game.
The world was full of demons. One day, the great master Terwa.
Excuse me, who?
Terwa
Can you speak up for me? You know what, never mind.
appeared with his 12 pupils to drive away the demons and save the world. And finally, after 100 years, peace was restored to the land.
Alright, I'm just gonna go ahead and move this along here.
However, Terwa was infected by demons, so he traveled west in search of Openisha Humufusa.
You know, man, I was trying to give you the benefit of the doubt, but my friend is such a better voice actor than you.
No, you fucking dick! I don't have it, you fucking monster! You have Uno!
All jokes aside, essentially the story is that, oh boy, I'm sure I'm gonna butcher this, Taihua was a hero that tried to rid the world of demons. Unfortunately, he becomes corrupted and dies, but is then reborn as your character. After the story cutscene plays, you play a short tutorial that teaches you the game's movement and combat. Once the tutorial is done, you are then led into a starting quest zone where you will do some quests until around level 10, which is when you'll begin the game proper. The combat and controls in Soul Saver Online take a bit to get used to if you are coming from MapleStory or Laetale. While the tutorial will teach you how to play the game with movement and combat, when you actually start to play, the normal control scheme is awkward at best. Pressing spacebar will have your character attack with their primary weapon. You can use assigned skills you learn on your hotbar, which are indicated by the corresponding keys on the keyboard. Movement is probably the most awkward of all. To move around, you press the directional keys on the keyboard, with up being jump and down being the defend button. Jumping is fine, but when it comes to high jumping, you have to hold the control button while you hold up on your keyboard, which is just a bit awkward if you are trying to move fluidly, and it's made even worse if you hit an enemy during your jump, which completely stuns you. Moving further into combat, most times you are attacking, you will be using your skills to deal damage rather than using your weapon. The problem is that at least in the early game with melee classes, anytime you are hit and you have your invincibility frames, when your character blinks, you can't do anything. Everything seems to lock up, which is frustrating, but trust me, with all the nuances of the controls, it does become something you quickly get used to. Combat has other mechanics as well. Souls that drop from enemies have various effects such as restoring health, or restoring MP, or building specific gauges. Fury, for instance, is a state you can enter in after collecting a certain amount of red souls. Fury increases your attack damage. You can also enter into your avatar mode, which is the black demon-like creature you can turn into. The avatar mode also levels up separately from your character with an avatar level, granting bonus stats to your character, so it's important to level up both your character and your avatar. Abilities your character learns is also learned from an NPC, much like old school World of Warcraft. Luckily, they only require you to go and talk to the NPC to learn them. Most of the gameplay in SSO revolves around you completing quests in dedicated areas, fighting with a party in a dedicated dungeon that ends with a boss, and then PvP content. Quests are listed in most town hubs, with a quest menu literally giving you a list of quests that are still available to you in a specific area, making questing really easy to do, thankfully. Dungeons are done by entering a portal with the monk NPC in front of it. Here you can access several different dungeon types, all with a level requirement to them, similar to party quests from MapleStory. I found that if you wanted to just dive right into action with a friend, dungeons were the place to go. Progression in Soul Saver is much like any other MMORPG. You can grind monsters, complete quests, fight bosses and dungeons with friends, and complete your monster compendium. Enemies will often drop these slabs that can make a picture of the monster. When you complete the picture, you get a nice hefty boost of experience and reputation. Leveling up provides you with 4 attribute points that you can spend in any of the attributes you choose from, or you can auto-assign stats that will best suit your class. You do have to be mindful of how you spend these points though, since you can easily spend points in a stat you don't need and make yourself weak. You also have gear that comes in increments of roughly every 10 levels. Soul Saver has a lot of equipment slots such as ring, armor, weapon, sub-weapon, amulet, spirit amulet, aura, etc. Most of this equipment can be enchanted with the soul compound system. Essentially, as you fight monsters and you have a sealed item equipped, the sealed item will gain souls. Once it's at 100%, you can use that item to essentially power up equipment you have. Each soul item has a different grade to it, which affects how powerful the enchantment is. It's pretty unique, I must say, and eliminates the pesky grind of having to get something like scrolls or puzzle pieces like in other games, but you do have to more or less get the soul items from drops, so I guess it's sort of the same. There is a ton of other features here as well, such as fishing and mining. Fishing is used to obviously get fish, which can then be used to heal yourself or be traded to various NPCs for items. Mining is used for Soul Saver's crafting system, which most crafting recipes have to be learned from enemy drops or purchased from shops. There is a lot more mechanics to the game, but most other things you will learn as you play. play. PvP is something I didn't get to experience, as when I went to the PvP area, no one was there, but you can duel people in town or even toggle your PvP flag to be able to fight people in designated PvP areas. The PvP community seems to be pretty alive for such a small game, as there are PvP tournaments hosted by player guilds, and sometimes, from what I've read, actual developers. Even the art style and music of the game is actually pretty top-notch in this genre, if I must say. Enemy designs especially look creepy and give this sort of Asian horror look. Kinda reminds me of some of the work of Junji Ito, but that's just me. The music isn't really anything that has me hooked yet, but for what it is, it fits the theme of the game very well. The last thing to talk about here would be the cash shop. The cash shop, from what I've been able to gather, is slightly pay to win, since there are items that grant actual stat boosts, but they may be considered useless at higher levels. The pets are more or less what are actually needed, as they grant extra stats, level up, and even fight with you, and as far as I could tell, with literally no up-to-date guides online, there is no other way to get pets other than from the cash shop or temporarily from events. Fortunately, most things are pretty cheap, only costing a few dollars to purchase, so if you spent maybe $10 here and there, it wouldn't be too terrible. Soul Saver Online has some flaws, and it can be hard to get into with all of its systems and mechanics, but if you can get past the game's shortcomings, there is a classic retro experience here. The game doesn't hold your hand, it's not super easy to level up, and it has some content that can be somewhat difficult. The community, unfortunately, isn't the most friendly, since most people keep to themselves, but there is a community here. More than I initially thought there would be, to be honest. Anyways, let's go ahead and get to my final thoughts about the game. SSO has a better progression scheme than its current competitors, in my opinion. Leveling up isn't completely handed to you, as it will take some effort on your part to get powerful, which is good to see in this genre. If you play the competitors such as MapleStory and Laetale, you will feel right at home in Soul Saver Online, as many of the gameplay elements you will find here will be very similar. The art style of the game, personally, to me, is one of the better 2D artwork you will see out there, and some of the enemy designs can be really grotesque sometimes, which adds more flavor to the game. PvP, from what I've seen, is pretty active with activities such as guild versus guild, arena 1v1 fights, dueling, and even rewards you can get from participating in PvP events. SSO has a decent amount of class customization as well, with some classes having two different types of weapons to choose from, giving different spells and abilities, as well as job advancements at higher levels that give even more build theory crafting with attribute points and skill points. Lastly, for such a small game that never gets advertised or talked about, it has a good amount of content to experience here, with a lot of it being easily accessible to play with friends. If you are looking for something to try out with your buddies, and you are a fan of MapleStory-like games, this game might be right up your alley. While the population of the game actually seems pretty decent, the players here all seem to keep to themselves for the most part. Whenever I was in town trying to ask for help, or hunting monsters and just trying to strike up a conversation, no one really seemed to respond. Now, it could be because some players don't speak English, but I have seen English-speaking players, and they still for the most part largely seem to ignore newer players, since most of the community is at endgame from what I saw, so it can be a bit alienating for a new player. Since the game is rather old and no one seems to really know about it, there are very few guides out there. Fat Pudding's website is a good site that has some information, as well as some of the guides found on the Steam page, but many of them are years old and could very well be completely outdated. It also doesn't help that many of the game's website is completely outdated as well. Speaking of the website, a lot of the features such as rankings or parts of the website in general don't even work, which just looks bad for a new potential player. The cash shop, as I stated, can be argued as pay to win by some people, especially considering that just like Laetale, pets can be an important aspect of your gameplay. Speaking of gameplay, while yes, some of the systems here will feel familiar to players of the 2D platforming MMORPG genre, Soul Saver's control scheme can be a bit clunky at times, especially when there is lag present. Luckily, the game does allow you to change some of the keybinds so you can customize how you play. Lastly, the game has some general inconsistencies, such as grammatical errors or even portions of the game that aren't even translated yet. Unfortunately, the game deserves a lot more polish than what it has, but based on how the game has been for years, and from what I remember when it was initially Ghost Online, I doubt many of these concerns will ever really get addressed. Well, that is my overview of Soul Saver Online. What did you think? Are you going to give Soul Saver Online a shot now? Do you currently play? Let me know down below in the comment section and I'll respond to you. Personally, I think SSO is a great alternative to some of the other games mentioned in this video, especially if you are looking for a more retro, less casualized experience. I want to thank everyone who watched this video up to this point. If you want to support the channel, please consider giving the video a thumbs up to help get the video more coverage, and let's be realistic here, probably more coverage for the game since no one really talks about it. If you like this sort of content, then maybe you should consider subscribing to the channel. All the support I get from you viewers, I really appreciate. If you want to follow my social media sites such as Discord, Twitch, and Twitter, those links will be in the video description below. Lastly, I want to thank all of my friends and loyal supporters who watch all of my videos. As always, that is all for this video, and I will see you in the next one.